Hello again, this is Buck Benny speaking, and we're at SPERDVAC. So we're excited to be here and be able to present some Jack Benny. We're going to focus today, for any folks that tune into the podcast and things, it's going to be a little different. We're going to focus on Jack and Mary, but not on the Jack Benny show. Jack and Mary as they appear on other shows as guests. Jack appeared on a ton of other shows as guests, but very seldom did he appear with Mary as with him. And so it's kind of cool to present that. And it's a space, I think this covers a span of 10 years or so, maybe a little more than that. And it's going to be fun to cover it all. We're going to cover the first one first, but before we get there, let's introduce all of our folks that we have here. I'm Buck Benny. I do a couple podcasts. I do the Jack Benny the Jack Benny Show OTR podcast. I've been doing it for 16 years or something like that, 17, 18, I don't know, 20 years, who knows? It's been a long time. And our new season's, well, by the time you hear this, our new season is up and running. So come check us out. And the easiest way to find all my stuff is if you just type in @BuckBenny on your search, everything will come up and you'll be able to go wherever you want. We also, all of us present on YouTube and Spotify on the Jack Benny TV video cast, where each time we go through an episode, we're doing season 5 this season. That'll be fun. But let's pass it off to, we have John. Tell us what you do. This is John Henderson, and yes, he has a wonderful podcast, and he'll tell you about it. So go ahead.
My name is John Henderson. My podcast is This Day in Jack Benny, where I get an episode of the Jack Benny Show from around that time of year. And, if you listen to an episode of Jack Benny, especially young people, probably not the people at SPERDVAC, but there's lots of other people in the world who are not huge old-time radio fans. And so, when you're listening to an old-time radio show as a sort of introduction, if there are any references that I think a modern-day audience wouldn't get, then I'll sort of explain it and play a clip. So even if you know the reference, it's cool to hear the clips, especially if, the Jack Benny Show is doing a spoof, then you get to hear a bit of the original before you get into the spoof. So yeah, this day, benny.com is the website.
Very cool. And you've done that
since 2016.
Wow, nice. It's a great show. One of the best copies of my show you'll ever run into. Over to Kathy.
Well, hey, I'm Kathy Fuller-Seeley, and I'm a very lucky person to get to teach radio, film, television history at the University of Texas at Austin. I wrote a book a couple of years ago about Jack Benny's radio career. That's easy to find. It's in a fabulous audio book format done by John and Stephanie Henderson. It's just simply amazing. And most recently, I've been starting to put out a series of Jack Benny's earliest radio scripts that I call Lost Broadcasts from 1932 and 1933. A third volume is getting ready to be released later this fall. I'll look for it on Amazon or from Bear Manor Media Books. Whoops. So
there you go. All right. Thanks, Kathy. And her books are fantastic. Her first book is just a
Jack
wonderful.
Wrote them, so.
Yeah, great. So over to Zach. Zach, tell us about your podcast and what you do with that one. Because I love that podcast.
Yeah. For those who don't know me, my name is Zach Eastman. I run a podcast called Yesteryear Ballyhoo Review. It's a golden age Hollywood early cinema podcast dedicated to titles made pre-1968 to discuss the context, history of production, and dissecting the plot of these films, kind of just try to suss out their inherent value towards the long tradition of cinema, like what has carried on into the things we see today. And Jack has actually prominently figured into it because of my fascination with his film career, which has subsequently spun off into a book writing journey for a film history book that nobody asked for. But that Kathy has been helping me out with immensely. Additionally, we do director series on the side with something called YBR Presents. It started with a Hitchcock dissection. It has evolved into a discussion around Jacques Tati, which is going to be wrapping up by the time that this discussion lands. And additionally, we're going to be starting to move into the history of Japanese horror in cinema with a new correspondent on the scene there. But and then, yeah, we're actually, like, as I'm recording this right now, I'm getting ready to do an episode of the regular show about Salt of the Earth from 1954. So lots of notes, lots of things, lots of stuff. If anybody knows the title, I don't need to talk about it. We all know what happened. We all know what HUAC did. But anyway, but I love coming on here because I don't get to talk about Jack on my show all the time. So this is a nice little exorcism of all the Benny fandom to come out, you know?
Totally.
And this is pretty much all we talk about is Jack. So there you go.
Well, that or Beatles AI algorithms and whatnot.
That's true.
Trying to figure out. But by the way, if anybody out there wants more of Buck, you guys need to listen to the little thing that we ended up doing about that John Lennon interview that got popped up all of a sudden on the internet. That's been one of the most interesting discussions.
Yeah, I love that too. So, and it has Jack Benny in it too. What are you going to do? So let's go ahead and start covering this. These different episodes of different shows. The ones we'll be covering. The first one is his appearance on Fred Allen with Mary, and that's from 1926. It's not 1926. I can tell you that.
You were doing the election results?
It's 1936. It's February 26th, I believe, 1936.
There's no time for that tonight, Mr. Allen.
What's going on here, Portland? What's all this excitement?
Wait till you see who's here.
All right. Who's here?
Come on up, Mary. Look, Mr. Allen, it's Mary Livingstone.
Mary Livingstone. Fancy little old frowsy me meeting you face to face, Mary. This is a pleasure.
It ought to be. You're getting the best of us. Good work, Mary. Oh, boy, will we get even with Mr. Allen tonight.
Now, wait a minute.
Gee, it was nice of you to invite me over, Porty.
Who invited what? Who's right?
Are you all prepared, Mary? Am I? I've been working like a dog all week.
Did you come over alone, Mary?
No, there's some fella standing over there. Who is he, Mary? I don't know. Some stooge who works on my program. I forget his name.
Well, don't leave him standing over there in that draft. Say, buddy.
Yeah?
Why, it's Jack Benny.
Thank you, folks. Hello, Fred.
Hello, Jack. I'm certainly glad to see you.
You know, for a minute, it didn't look as though I was going to get in here.
Yes, it's lucky your name came up in the conversation, Mr.
Benny, Jack Benny.
Benny? Gee, that name sounds familiar.
Mary, I'm your husband, remember?
Oh, yes, Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
You had the rice in your hair and the straw suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
Is he Jack Benny, the moving picture star, Mary? That's what he thinks.
Now, wait a minute, you two. Jack is my guest tonight, and I'm certainly not going to stand here and see him insulted.
Thanks, Fred. And as one moving picture star to another...
2 stars. That's more than their pictures got.
Mary, read what they wrote for you. We're guests here, remember.
It's all right. You can't insult us, Jack. You ought to see our fan mail.
Quiet, Portland. You just got back from Hollywood recently, didn't you, Jack?
Yes, Freddie. I was out there 11 months. I made those 2 pictures, Broadway Melody and It's in the Air.
Oh, yeah, I know. I made a picture out there, too, you know. Thanks a million.
Oh, really? Well, I was so busy out there, I never got around to those Nickelodeons, you know. Oh, you know how it is, Freddie, with me. Polo, golf, hiking, and swimming. You know, I'm an outdoor man. But enough about me, Fred. Let's hear about you. How did you like my last picture?
You bet.
Oh.
Yes, that was a consensus. What's that big package under your arm, Jack? Are those your notices?
No, this is my violin. Of course, I don't expect to be called on, but you know the public.
I'll say it's best to play safe, Jack. If he plays safe, he won't even open that violin case.
Now, look, it opens easy. Look, you just press this little thing, and before you know it, I'll have my violin out, and you'll hear some of the greatest violin. Who did that?
I guess you even opened the case like an amateur.
Say, Herman,
Yes, Mr. Allen.
what's the big idea of giving Mr. Benny the gong?
Oh, I seen him reaching for the violin, so I let him have it.
Some hospitality, I'll say.
Mr. Benny is our guest star, Herman. Now, I think you ought to apologize.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Benny. I was only acting for the good of the program.
Thanks.
Say, I've got an idea, Jack. Instead of the violin, let's start off with a high spot.
Well,
You're right, Porty. And I've got a high spot right here. I've written a special poem for tonight. Bravo, Mary! Bravo!
Now, stop it, Portland. Stop. Here, what are you applauding for?
I'm giving Mary a reception. Go ahead, Mary. What's the poem?
I wouldn't do it.
It's
don't bother
dedicated
with
to
it.
Town Hall.
I wouldn't bother.
Quiet, everybody. Town Hall. Dear old Town Hall. Yippee, wow, hot dog, I'll say. You can keep your dear old Town Hall. Give me good old Labor Day. Labor Day.
I knew it.
Oh, Labor
I knew
Day.
Labor Day.
Something told me
I
that
knew
it was
that.
coming.
That's swell, Mary. Well, Fred, I'm practically tuned up.
Now, wait a minute, Jack. Jack, I may be wrong, but to me, the violin at this point might clash.
I've got another poem here. You can read it, Porty. Yes, that'll keep up the terrific tempo you set, Mary.
Oh, shucks. After I got my rosin out and everything.
Gee, Jack, I don't know why we should take the bitter when we can get the sweet.
That's cute.
Thanks, Mary. I'll recite your poem. To an olive. Little olive in your bottle.
That's swell, Portland. That's certainly swell. Brevity and everything. You had the whole thing.
Freddie, if there was ever a spot for a violin solo, it's right now.
A musical lull might liven things up at that, Jack. Say, what is that song, that song you're gradually plugging into a hit?
Oh, you mean Love and Bloom?
That's the one.
Yes, how long have you been playing that, Jack?
Oh, about 4 years on and off.
Yes, on and off key.
Quiet.
Well, 4 years on the violin isn't so bad. A year on each string. I used to play the clarinet. You know, I started on Glowworm 10 years ago, and that worm isn't even sizzling yet.
Say, Schubert got famous not finishing the Unfinished Symphony, didn't he?
That's right.
Yes, but the Schuberts are busy. They've got the Follies and all those Blossom Times. Maybe you and Jack could get together, Mr. Allen.
That's
Well,
not
yes, that's... Oh,
Well, it's
fine.
not
Sure,
a bad
line,
idea. Yes, sir, life is a game of cards, and here we are back to back, Jack. That's not a bad idea.
Freddie, I'd give $1,000 if I could think of an answer. Go ahead.
That's not a bad idea. That's not a... I got half an answer for $500. I mean, if you're into it.
I knew we'd be ad-libbing pretty soon.
We'll be talking into that party again before we know it, as we did 2 weeks ago. When you... that's not a bad idea.
That's it, yes.
That's no... Funny the way these little microphones are built, and still you can put your foot in it. But that's not a bad idea, Jack, that suggestion. If you'll help me finish Glowworm, I'll get right with you, and we'll clean up Love and Bloom in no time.
Well, have you got a clarinet, Fred?
Here's one.
Where'd you get a clarinet, Mary?
I was out with Ted Lewis last night.
Oh. Now, wait a minute, Fred. Don't start without me.
No,
Let's
no.
get together.
Now, that note was stuck in the clarinet there, Jack. It must have been left over from my last recital.
Have you got the right end in your mouth?
Yes, I play it from either end. It doesn't really matter.
Okay. All right, we'll start... wait a minute, I just want to get going a little bit here.
All right.
Little rehearsal. Ma, what time is it? Those are the happy days.
They all
I'm
set?
all set now, Fred. I'm
Okay.
ready for you.
I could close my eyes. I thought it was Reuben off there for a second. We'll start with glowworm, Jack. You just take the pizzicato.
The pizzicato.
Uh-huh.
All right. Wait till I ask Peter what that is. What is that pizzicato? Okay.
All ready?
Ready.
Some tone, Jack. You know, that last note sounded just like a bell to me.
Some note. It's the telephone. Will you answer it, Mary? All right. Hello? Yes. Yes, I'll tell Mr. Benny.
What is it, Mary?
A request.
Are we standing too near the microphone?
No, some man doesn't like glowworm. He wants Jack to play a solo.
What man?
Your father.
Oh.
Haven't you any relatives, Mr. Allen?
Yes, but their phones have all been taken out.
Gee, I don't know what to say, Freddie. This is embarrassing, really. Do you mind if I finish out our duet as a solo?
No, it's all right. You really ought to practice, you know. You're going to play in Pittsburgh next week, aren't you?
That's right. I wouldn't want to make a slip over there.
Hey, and a slip would be noticed in Pittsburgh, too. There are plenty of music lovers in Pittsburgh.
If Jack plays in the theater, the streets will be full of music lovers.
Yeah, I
Is
get
the
it.
program dragging, or is it me?
I'll fix that. All right, boys. Thank heaven.
Wait a minute, Jack. Wait a minute. Come in.
Where can I find Jack Benny?
I'm Jack Benny.
Are you making a personal appearance in Pittsburgh next week?
Why, yes, I'll be at the Stanley Theater.
And you intend to play Love in Bloom in Pittsburgh?
Why, yeah. Hey, what's the big idea?
Yes, don't take Jack's violin.
I'm giving it right back to him.
Oh, my head. A fine thing to do to a guest star.
Gosh, the violin's in 1,000 pieces.
Just a minute, friend. Who are you?
I'm the mayor of Pittsburgh.
Well, we're back from the clip.
That's such a great clip.
We love that clip. I tell you, it's great.
So if we're talking Star Wars logic, Fred and Jack were friends in the Jedi Order, but then Stuart Kanan happened, caused the fall of the comedy Jedi, the rise of the Fred Allen Sith. If pop culture has taught me anything, this is the Phantom Menace of the Benny Allen feud. It's just interesting to hear them chumming around and not like bickering at each other. Such a weird clip.
It is a weird clip, and I would disagree with Zach, though. It's not Star Wars. This is Star Trek. In that Fred eventually becomes Khan, and this is like early Khan, where Kirk thinks that maybe he can be a friend with him or something, and but no, it turns out that he's an enemy, and later on, it's
how
saying,
can the
Fred,
how can the tree live in Waukegan, Kirk, when the sap is in Hollywood?
Anyway,
Yeah, I thought this was the Terminator and Fred Allen's really a robot.
Your clothes, give them to me now.
yes. Any of it works. It all works, but
Hasta la vista, baby. Sorry.
This clip is so interesting because, and I don't know, you have to be a Jack Benny fan to pick it up, but the fact that Jack and Mary are married in this clip, and usually they're never mentioned as being married, and I just think it's kind of fun how they mention being married, and there's mention of Niagara Falls in here, their honeymoon thing. I mean, it's just kind of fun, and then and Portland, to me, it sounds like she's being Fred's wife, even though they don't mention it, just for the fact that she's acting like she's the same age as Mary, where her character is always played as younger, and so I think she's kind of out of character in this a little bit. and more being Mary's friend or someone that knows Mary a little bit. The joking between her and Mary doesn't work all that well for me. I enjoy it. It just doesn't. I'm just going, okay, I don't see an audience laughing at some of this, but a lot of the Fred Jack stuff is good as always. It's just strange that they're not attacking each other as much and they're more just joking around with each other. But
they
anyway,
get slightly close when they do slight jabs at each other about their respective films.
yes,
At this time, Jack had just done It's in the Air, a Zeppelin-esque film, or a hot air flying machine movie, a climax, centered around his con artist persona at this time. And Fred was in a movie called Thanks a Million, which is actually a fairly decent little political satire. It's not perfect, but you can tell that Fred had some input in terms of how his character was written and how he was able to deliver some dialogue. But I find it interesting because that movie wasn't as successful. It didn't get Fred a film career, not that he would have wanted it.
He didn't
But
want it.
no, yeah. Aren't you the one who told me that Mark Sandridge had to basically drag him out to Hollywood for
Yes.
Love Thy Neighbor? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the like closest it gets. And then there's like, I don't know, when he's gonna play the violin, it sort of sounds like they're kind of like he's supporting him, but I can sense Fred's sarcasm slightly. It's sort of there.
The
I
joke
think
is that Jack Benny's not good at the violin. That's already established.
right. Yeah.
So he's insulting him sort of in that way.
Yeah. And this is
and Jack's always a little better at violin than anybody gives him credit for. Well, quite a bit better, really. Fred Allen on his what's he playing?
Oh, clarinet. Yeah, clarinet.
His clarinet playing is bad. I mean, it's just bad. And he does this a few times with Jack over the years, and it never gets like any better. If anything, it gets worse because I think he, never plays it unless he's with Jack.
The TV
later on, they're playing it up a bit, I think.
Yeah, the TV episode he did is the Carnegie Hall for Fred Allen. Like it is like the testament to his clarinet inability to play.
Yeah. Anyway, Kathy, what did you think of this? What stood out to you?
The context was fascinating to me because this was the spring of 1936 was Jack Benny's most difficult spring of his entire career. Doing some research, behind the scenes into what was going on. Jack was dependent on one writer, Harry Kahn, and he paid him quite well. But Jack was becoming really famous, and he just paid Kahn a weekly salary. And Kahn was starting to get more and more frustrated that he wasn't becoming as famous as Jack. That Jack was getting all the glory and the fame and the money, and Harry was just the behind-the-scenes writer. So Jack, Mary, the whole cast, and Harry and his wife embarked on this several months long tour heading east, where they would Jack and Mary would play vaudeville dates during the week, and then they would go to some city's radio station and put on their show on a this Sunday evening. And by this point, the clip says, they're going to be going back to from New York, where the Town Hall Tonight was broadcast, taking the train back to Pittsburgh to do a week at the Nixon Theater or something like that. But what's going on behind the scenes is this is less than 1 month before Harry would up and leave Jack in the middle of the night with no script written for that coming week's the mid-March radio episode from Baltimore. And when this happened to Jack, it was like 2 days before the show, and he had no radio show, and he had no script. He went back to Fred. He called in, his good friends in the business for help, and to come up to piece together some kind of script in 2 days. And Fred ended up lending him some young writers, as well as pitching in. So I saw the background of this episode as a very anxiety-provoked time for Jack and Mary as they're on the road and having these constant tussles with Harry Kahn and his wife, and yet Jack wasn't aware of what was going to hit him in just a few weeks of losing Con altogether. And what was he going to do? Because it had been his only writer for 4 years.
Well, the writers he lent him, they weren't Murrow and Boulogne, were they? They were.
It was.
Well, I think one of them was.
Boulogne? One of them.
Yeah, one of them was.
It's like Boulogne.
So
Boulogne.
Jack's like, oh, I like this one. I'm just going to keep him. You can't have him back.
I was kind of Fred,
That's
who
great.
didn't really use his writers that much, to say, you can have this young pup here.
Yeah.
So do we know, or can we speculate, who wrote this guest shot? Like, would Fred have written it, or would Jack have sort of pitched in, or even Harry Con? Do we know?
As
How
far as I know,
much
Fred-
was Con
Fred
doing
did his own
outside of?
writing.
Okay, I was gonna ask like how
I doubt
much.
at this time. I doubt it would be Con, because I think they were already having some issues and things. I don't think Con would have done it probably. But I would think it was Fred. It could have been Fred, and for all we know, it could have been who was it? Murrow Boulogne that he came with.
Boulogne.
Boulogne. So it could have been Boulogne. So
Yeah, I just wonder, because there are references to the Jack Benny program, which we know that Fred listened to, like Mary's poems, and even a specific poem like getting into Labor Day or whatever it was.
What was Con ever?
Labor Day.
The two of them could have corresponded and sat down and just said, it's a 10-minute shot. We'll just sort of riff on this. So it was nice in the short clip to have Mary was quite well known for her poems at this time. So her Labor Day, oh Labor Day. And so how nice to give her that that shot to be able to talk about the things that the public knew her for.
Well, and Kathy, you and I just read this last week or week before or something like that. It wasn't it Don Yop that put out the article that's on all of Mary's poems
about all her Labor Day poems,
and it lists a bunch of the poems you can read and everything. So folks that want to do more research on that, take a look.
Now those were all written by Harry Con back in the day, so Con's inescapable.
Yes.
How often was Con, or did he ever write beyond the parameters of the program? Did he ever write material for Jack for guest shots?
Oh yes, he well, okay, so yes, he wrote everything for Jack, including, here was another source of friction. Harry demanded to be put on Jack's movies and to be paid extra as contributing dialogue to the films. Morrow and Boulogne would do that with the Mark Sandrich films.
Yep.
So it was a way to get an extra little swag and maybe punch up the script here and there a little bit.
He took that beyond that too. I learned he got Morrow and Boulogne, or at least Morrow, on for Meanest Man in the World to completely overhaul Maury Riskin's work,
which I am fine with. Give me more Morrow and Boulogne. I'll take them over most of the people that wrote Jet scripts. So
it's very interesting that we think of Hollywood and radio as two very separate industries, but there were all these kind of exchanges and ways of scratching each other's back and getting a little extra money. So
this might be a good transition into our next thing. Do we know who wrote the Brewster's Millions for the Lux Radio Theater?
We should, if any of us did our research, but no, I don't.
I have a book on Lux Radio Theater. Oh, maybe at my office. Oops. So they were on every week, and so they had a staff of writers or paid writers to do their adaptations.
If I was to make a guess. My guess would be they didn't have much to do with the Brewster's Millions script, because it just doesn't sound like a Murrow Boulogne piece at all.
No.
But the 1938 Ballpate one that we're going to talk about after this one, that one I could see them write, or at least the beginning parts of it and things, because it definitely had their feel to it. So I don't know, but
it seems to Ballpate seems to predestine a lot of sketches that would involve Jack talking to a director or a studio head of any kind, and which would eventually lead into the Claudette Colbert sketch, which then became the Irene Dunn sketch. But it's been done interchangeably, not just on Jack's program, but on other guild programs. And Yeah, Brewster's Millions has to be the staff writers on Lux Radio Theater, and I'm sure like Walden Hughes would be able to chime in like at
Sure.
this convention after this.
Check the
program.
chat. Check the chat.
Check the chat
I'm
below.
sure-
Yeah, the one
I'm
we
sure
can't
we're getting
see.
blown away in the chat.
The one we can't see right now. The one where everybody's making fun of us.
right.
But yeah, no, it's because it sounds like a Lux episode. The beginning
Sure.
has a very good mislead that makes you think maybe different material might be written, but it's pretty standard. It's there. It sounds like Cecil B. DeMille's out there going like, now, ladies and gentlemen, one of the great comedians. And then we
also
get
in the
into
chat,
this-
I'm sure saying, where did Buck get that nice shirt? So anyway,
yeah.
good luck to you finding it. Uh, the let's since we're switching gears over to the second show, the Brewster's Millions. That was 1937. Anybody know the date on that? I think it's
Yes,
I think,
February 15th.
I was going to say I think all these are
1937,
February at some
because
point.
DeMille mentions Jack's birthday.
Birthday,
so,
yep.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Jack's birthday is on Valentine's Day, so you folks know. And I enjoy this Brewster's Million performance. I really like Mary's work that they added her. She actually gets the biggest laughs a lot of the time with her piece, and to see her be his girlfriend / fiance that's kind of freaking out at him throwing all this money out the window is kind of interesting and fun.
Yes, as is the idea of Jack Benny throwing money out windows. And I said, what I found was the most ironic thing about this episode is that Brewster's Millions has been made dozens of times, but to have Jack Benny, the man who hangs on to every penny, put into this position unironically, throwing out money left and right, this really shows me that his public comic persona was not totally identified with his cheapness in February 1937. Because if to do it 10 years later, you just would not have been able, without commenting, to have Jack Benny giving away $1, let alone in the end throwing buckets of it out the window. So again, as a sort of a plot point in his development of his comic character, I thought the fact that nobody mentioned it fascinating.
At this point, it's the vanity and the violin. Those are the two ones that are sticking out the most, and they slide in somewhat with what his film persona is, but not by much. And like I found it interesting to hear a Jack performance outside of that construct, because I think he gives a fine performance in it. He engages with the character. He shows off that what would I call it? Fake confidence of like, why I'll spend all of it. Well, not like it's something that works for that performance. It's one of those interesting things to listen to him react differently than how I would expect him to react within 20 years of his radio career. So it was interesting. And I appreciated how they managed to, as Buck said, give Mary something fun to work with. It's not a thankless role. Like she gets stuff to do. She's involved.
You're right. For radio fans out there, if you've never seen her performance in this film, This Way Please, her one movie role, it's a similar kind of character with a sort of spunk and verve, for a sort of standing by the side a girlfriend kind of character.
Yeah.
So
I will say, when I was listening to this episode, it seemed like a regular episode of the Lux Radio Theater, just kind of something you have in the background. You're listening, it's fun and interesting. But I did feel like whenever Mary spoke, I stopped and took notice. Like there was something that she had, especially at this time in the late 30s, that just really, really clicked and was really just engaging.
I don't know how much of the audience watching out there fully knows how Mary's confidence in her performances declined over the years. Like this sounds like she's having fun behind the mic.
Yeah.
This is not the Mary that's messing up lines or you know,
Right.
eventually.
Yeah, to me, Mary, say 36 to 41, 2, sometime in there. That's the best of Mary. I
This is
love
peak
Mary that
Mary
way. Then
Livingstone.
they got her a little too harsh after that, and then also her mic fright developed even more and all of that. So, but that is the prime, and her movie is, I think, 37 or something like that. Yeah.
37.
So it's right in the same time frame of this. The other thing that comes to mind every time I'm just so glad they created this with Jack and with Mary. It's great. It's just the film version has Rochester in it, has Eddie Anderson in it in the film, and which is great. It's just, I always wish that they would have had Jack and Mary in the film too, because then I think it would be one of Jack's all-time classic films that people would think about. And the film itself, it's already kind of a classic, but I think it would even pushed it more into that realm of being a classic film in and of itself.
The film predates this radio show, doesn't it?
I would assume so, but I'm not sure.
Well, the
Zach's our historian. Zach.
The one with Eddie Anderson is 1945.
Oh, really?
Okay.
So it's much later.
If this film is 1945, why don't you get Jack to do it? I mean, I can see Mary in 45 might not want to do it.
Okay, because it was made by Columbia, which was a B studio, and they couldn't have afforded Jack. In 1945, Jack still had 2 contracts with Fox and Warner's, and this was a pinch penny kind of film.
Harry Conn couldn't afford Jack even if he wanted to. The first version of Brewster's Millions, which is unfortunately now a lost film, was directed by Cecil B. DeMille and Oscar Apfel in 1914. We then have versions. Yeah, we have versions in 21, 26, 35, and up to then 45, and then obviously there's international titles that cover it, and then the last big American title version of it was Walter Hill's version in 1985.
Yeah. My Brewster's Millions, of course, is the 80s Richard Pryor one. We would rent that all the time from
of course, it's the one time that DeMille was ever topped, hands down.
I love it, and I love the concept of having to spend lots and lots of money. That always fascinated me as a kid, and you can see the same thing in this episode. In fact, I wish they leaned a little more on that. It seemed like to make it an hour-long episode, they were stretching with some filler stuff when I would have rather had them, dive into the meat of the plot. But I guess can't always have it perfectly.
I get the feeling too that there's an emphasis on trying to write too many jokes for Jack in this rather than telling a story. That is the one quibble I have with it, is that there is a lot of jokey, like bit here, as John was alluding to. There's like episodic natures to it. And it's even evident in the very beginning where a violin plays. Like, and that's the same thing that happens in Baldpate too. Like they want to hit. They've got Jack Benny, the #1 radio comedian. They're going to capitalize on that, and I don't mind that, but it is disappointing considering that you'll find later that Jack can handle drama radio programs very well on Suspense and in other auspices. So it's a little bit of a shame, but it's not enough to deter anyone from listening to it. I don't think it's a very good example of where like Jack was and how he was perceived at that point, especially. Yeah.
Well, we have to talk about the introduction, the mini bio of Jack Benny that Cecil B. DeMille does at the beginning. Firstly, it's fascinating to sort of like see how they're presenting Jack Benny. And a lot of it is pretty close to the truth. But they're also joking. Like at the end of every line, there's a punchline. So I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, the big thing, which I was like, where did I get this idea? I found out where I got it. It's from here, that Jack Benny was introduced to Mary Livingstone by one of the 4 Marx brothers.
Right.
That's not true, Kathy.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, possibly yes, but it wasn't at the wasn't at the holiday Seder.
No.
So it was just inviting people over for dinner because her father was a prominent sort of merchant in Vancouver, and the Jewish community was small. And so if a prominent Jewish performers were in town playing the Orpheum circuit, that they might get invited to the Mark's house for dinner. So yes, some of this is kind of true. So, but she was 13.
The version of the story I always hear is he and Harpo decided to go over to this house because they heard there was cute girls there or something, and she was 12, and Jack's like, oh, she's a little girl, let's get out of here. And that's
but her older
now whether that's fact at all, who knows.
She was either 12 or 13. Mary did like to keep changing her age, but her older sister Babe was dating vaudeville performers and was soon to be married to a violinist. So there are many ways in which little Sadie Marks and Jack Benny could have met or run around in the same circles. So
yeah. And then in her viewpoint, when she supposedly re-meets him at the May Company or sometime later, right? Does she remember her first meeting of him at that time? Is she like, oh, this is the jerk I met when I was 12? Or is this like a new meeting of this person and didn't connect the two?
Hey, you were at that party with the weakest of the Marx Brothers. Wow.
Yeah.
Poor Zeppo. So, but the story is that she brought her high school friends, to go heckle him, sit on the first row of the seats at the theater in Los Angeles, and not laugh at his jokes and give him a hard time. So,
but that was supposedly right after that. That would be when she was 12 or 13 or something like that, right? When she was very young.
No, this was when she was 17.
Oh,
so down in Los Angeles, they next met. So she was 12 or 13 when they met up in Vancouver.
Yes.
And then he was playing, as I said, her sister was married to another violinist traveling in the same company. Yeah. And when they met in Los Angeles, when she was 17 or 18, depending on how old you think she is, she didn't like him that much. And so there was a tension between them. And as I said, she brought her girlfriends there to heckle him in the theater by not laughing at his jokes. So,
yeah, that's great. No, that history is so interesting of that. But
also, Cecil B. DeMille's biography of Jack Benny is in print. It's somewhere around eBay. It's probably the most accurate biography of Jack Benny that exists. Irving Fine's book, forget it. It's Cecil B.
Yeah, exactly. Cecil B. is the one to go with. And speaking of Cecil B. DeMille, in the next, if we jump ahead a year to 1938, I think it's still the same month. I think these are all February, which I don't know why, but Jack must have had time to do guest appearances in February or something.
Actually, no, it's September 26, 1938.
Completely different. Okay.
So it was
birthday.
Right before the start of the new Jell-O season. So here they were appearing on the Lux Radio Theater just as a kind of preview to, hey, now he's a really top comedian and his show is going to start, but here you get to hear him after his summer off.
So that one, what's cool about it is Cecil B. DeMille isn't only the person that introduces him as the beginning of the show, but he also appears in the show with Jack, and it makes it a lot of fun. So let's chat about that one for a while, because it's probably of all these we're presenting, it's one of my favorites, because it's just the banter is fun, the whole thing is kind of fun. John, what were your thoughts on that one?
Well, I have to say, it was not my favorite.
See, why did I go to John? John, John and I are always opposing views on almost everything.
I know. I actually liked Brewster's Millions better, and maybe it's because I'm predisposed to like the story of Brewster's Millions, and I'd never heard of 7 Keys to Baldpate. I spent the whole time trying to figure out, like, where do I put this in my Jack Benny boxes, right? Because there's the kind of like old school but while he's still developing his persona. And then there's sort of like in universe, part of the radio show, and then when he does like guest shots, like suspense or other dramas, there. Whereas this one, I couldn't quite tell whether they were trying to take this seriously as like, this is a serious drama, or whether this was, supposed to be part of the Benny universe, whether they, like sometimes they sort of break the fourth wall and like,
but that's
they
kind
don't
of the
take
point
it
of the
seriously.
story. That ends up being the point of the story of Baldpate. And
Right.
I see your dilemma there, because this could be a Benny episode extended to an hour. It also is 7 Keys to Baldpate. I kind of like when they switch it up and they get him up into the mountain. There is an element of Jack as a performer at this time, which seems much more predisposed to what we know and recognize Jack to be, that works well with the characters coming in. And it has to do with something that I love about Jack, which is he is constantly put upon, and he suffers fools constantly, whether they're Frank Nelson, Mel Blanc, whoever. It's like an early version of what the energy would be if you were in the train station to a certain extent, where you have a bunch of people just coming in. The difference is the auspices are we are receiving his reactions as funny, but the characters are serious and engaging in this, what will break the fourth wall story of a murder. Like that's it. I get where you're confused with it. I find it fun from a metatextual context, not just because of what the story is, but just kind of listening to them try to do this audibly.
Well, that's why I like this whole thing with Mary and Jack together on all these shows, because it is meta. It's like, are they married? Are they not married? Are they the characters on the show? Are they not the character? And it's one of the reasons why you probably don't have all that many appearances of them together, because it is confusing and it is tricky. And how are we going to write this thing? And so then you get Jack on his own is a lot easier to deal with than Jack and Mary. But
the way that I was experiencing it was, you go to the introduction. Okay, this is Jack and Mary outside of the radio show as a guest shot, right? And then they do that, and suddenly the show is, you're in the midst of the actual drama, and you're like, okay, now we're in the drama. I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna put myself in that place. It's a bit silly, it's a bit fun. And then because they're breaking the fourth wall and all those sorts of things, you're like, oh, I guess this isn't where I thought I was. I guess I wasn't in the real world. I guess I'm in this sort of like fantasy place. So that was the thing that I was just struggling with. And then at the end,
and it's the thing I love, so
and they explain everything, then by that time the show's over, and so you can't enjoy it and know where you are. So that's what I didn't like about it. Whereas when you do the regular Jack Benny program, you start with okay, this is our sort of like real, fake but real world, and now we're going to do a play, and then you're in the play, and wild and crazy things can happen. You can break the fourth wall because it's part of a play, and then it's over, right? My mind is too structured to be able to
John, I need to
this
show you.
This is not analysis of John time.
John, I need to show you a movie from 1999. It's called The Matrix. I want to see how much your eyes pop out.
I don't think I can handle it.
Well, now, when you all were talking earlier about what was done to pad out Brewster's Millions for an hour-long show, I found highly amusing the fact that they brought on serious classical musician Ephraim Zimbalist to play the bee, and a great throwback, now to Jack Benny's famous character, and to fill some time by playing the bee. So,
at what point in the sort of Fred Allen chronology is this?
This is a year and a half after the technical end of the feud. Okay. So the feud actually ended in March 37, and this is a year and a half later. But fascinating.
But of course, they bring the feud back and things. So it's always hard. The feud is hard because it like has an ending, and then it goes again, and then it pretty much never really ends after that, the second go round. But yeah.
But before we move on, I wanted to mention the last thing about that I had about the Lux Radio Theater stuff, which we sort of touched on. But in this episode, Mary is quite famous, and you can just tell from the way that Cecil B. DeMille treats her and the way that the audience reacts to her, that she was famous and she could have built on that, like we've said. But it's interesting, knowing where she goes, which is pretty much nowhere at this point, that she's so hot.
Oh yeah. Well, this is post her first film by herself, right?
And Jack's up at their show is up at the top.
And
of the
so
ratings.
for them, they're going, oh my gosh, she might just be launching, really taking off in her career. So we have to show her a lot of respect. And so they did.
But just as you say, but she can sell it. She wasn't, this is just kind of right at the edge where she's still willing to do these things. I think the crippling part of her sort of shyness and mic fright hadn't really started to kick in yet. So I think, John, that's a great point.
I wonder if it also helps that, because it's been alluded to that she felt a need to compete with Gracie at various points because of that expectation dangling in the air. George and Gracie are not as big on radio at this point as they would end up becoming later on. I don't think she senses the same amount of competition at this point that she's going to experience in 42 onward. Additionally, too, I think it's I don't know. I get this feeling that listening to her perform, it's magical because she is so great at this time. I still get the sense, no matter what era of Mary it is, that she's doing this because she wants to do this for Jack. And I think that will always kind of carry some part of my impression of Mary, no matter what she might think she's capable of. You're thrust into show business kind of out of necessity rather than desire. It's going to be a complicated beast, no matter what opportunities are thrown your way, no matter how many Fibber McGee and Molly movies they put you in. It's not going to be the same thing as somebody like Jack, who got attracted to the idea of being on a stage and getting applause and going through different parts of vaudeville. And I think it's evidenced with the thing we're going to be moving into next with Bing Crosby. It's a different Mary. It's a little bit of a different Mary, and Jack is much more the star and the attraction. And that by this point, everything is so cemented into what we recognize Jack to be.
Well, let's jump forward then. Let's jump forward almost a decade to 1947 with Jack and Mary appearing on Bing Crosby's show. And I love Bing Crosby's show. This is to me, right around this time frame is the peak of his show. This is one of the episodes that I just love to have. No matter how they were, I would have loved this episode no matter what they did, because just getting Bing Crosby, Mary Livingstone, and Jack Benny all together on one show is just wonderful for me, because I just love the characters that they'll play on their shows, and Bing Crosby is a character on his show. I mean, it is not apparently everything I hear about his personal life. It is not how he is normally, but he is the best actor I can think of at acting casual, acting like I'm so cool. I'm just, I can handle any situation that comes up, and my show is just smooth as silk, and it really is. And
he could really take that acting ability on a road of some kind. He could take that on the road.
Yes, he could. He could.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question though,
but he needs a partner that's even more funny than he is. Probably.
Well, let's hope we find somebody.
A machine gun style delivery would be good to kind of counterpoint his slow delivery.
Yeah.
It's weird that they never did that, but Well, I can see how Bob Hope and Bing Crosby would work together. I mean, you can see how you go. His laid back style and Bob Hope's aggressive style would totally complement each other.
Cool and really a coward meet up together. What happens? Yeah.
But Jack Benny and Bing Crosby is a lot dicier of a mix. Their styles are kind of similar in some way. You don't know if they would work together, but apparently they do, because they were together a lot over this time period.
It's a strange combo that works, because if
Yeah.
you listen to part 2 of Your Money or Your Life, or the week after, where they go to Bing's house, they have a great template with the Oscar bit, and going into Bing's house, and this is a point where Bing's wealth is starting to become a point of genuine humor. That it's something that Hope himself would have to address when he started obtaining untold sums of money from real estate. But they gave him, I think it's interesting to listen to one guy who's known for being a cheapskate facing off against the guy who we know was a cheapskate.
Yes.
I think that's where the funny part lies for me. It's
I
don't know if it worked.
Similarity
then,
you wouldn't think would work, but it does. So
exactly.
I haven't thought this through, but I'm just going to throw this out there. I feel like Jack Benny can either play the straight man or the comedian.
Yes.
He can play the straight man in reacting to the other, stooges or whatever. And when he gets riled up, then he sort of takes the comedian role. Yeah. And in this episode, I feel like a lot of the times, he's trying to play the comedian role to Bing Crosby's straight man.
Well, and now that you brought it up, I haven't thought this through either. So this is a common theme between the two of us. But they both can do that. Both Bing and Jack are probably the two best that I can think of off the top of my head at either playing either part. They can either do straight man, or they can, depending on who they have, well, especially Bing, depending on who he has as a guest on his show, he's constantly swinging around and being either one of those, and does a great job of both. So
and that dynamic interchanges,
and Jack in the same style. So
and that dynamic interchanges once Mary comes into it. So now it can go either way. It's sort of a wild card gamble here.
Right.
And as far as Mary on the show, I know that this is not her prime period per se, but she's more than fine on it. She's on point on delivery. You know,
well, virtually every one of these makes me wish we had more of Mary and Jack appearing on more other people's shows, because I enjoy every single one of these we presented tonight.
I like when she interacts with Gracie Allen. I kind of wish they had gone on Burns and Allen together at some point, but that never happened.
They didn't, did they? I mean, as far as I know, these are the only ones that I know of them being together. Now, I didn't do a huge search for these or anything. This is mostly out of my memory and everything, but so there could be others. But as far as I know,
Gracie came onto the show the week after Yosemite to promote the presidential campaign, and you do hear that their interactions.
You'll in the upcoming volume 3 of the scripts, you will see Mary and Gracie interact the most when Gracie bounds into the show as part of the Looking for Her Brother skit. So this is January 1933, and we don't have the show, but you'll see them. Maybe we can do a recreation or something like that if we can find a good Gracie, because they do interact more in a show we don't have. So
and everybody, I don't think we have hardly any of the Gracie searching for her brother. She did it on multiple shows. She'd appear on people's shows and be looking for her brother. Yeah. But I think almost all of those, or all of them, are lost to time.
My Eddie Cantor friend, David Weinstein, says that somewhere he's heard when she appeared on the Eddie Cantor show as part of her.
And what's funny is I was going to throw that out there, but I was unsure of myself that I didn't say it. But if anybody's exists, I think it's the Eddie Cantor one. So
it's so weird that Gracie was trying to look for her brother, and now we're just trying to look for Gracie.
There you go. I would like to compliment Mary on her singing. It was she didn't sing very much after the 1930s and early 40s, and so it was kind of lovely. Her voice sounded a little lower than it was before, but she's a totally not unprofessionally trained vocalist, and it was she had many talents. That, just as you say, I sure wish we had more performances by her. So.
Agreed, and I love her singing. I always have, and to have this is just delightful. And then, like you say, really, this is the only singing I can think of that she does, say 45 on, Really,
Right.
before that is where she does the
Oh,
singing.
okay. The only other one is when they sing when they're going to CBS.
Oh,
We're
Tune
gonna
in
take you
on
on a slow
CB. Tune in
take you on
on
a slow boat to
CB.
China
Yeah.
on
yeah.
a movie.
But is
CBS.
that one of the ones they do in a round where each person sings a little bit of it? Yeah,
Yeah.
because she'll do that. I mean, that'll happen in the
Yeah.
50s, and certainly she sings in the Easter walks that they have and that sort of
Oh,
thing.
good.
Oh,
Good
yeah,
point.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
But
Yeah.
it's always short. It's always part.
Yeah.
She's
No.
a little piece of the song, but not. It's
Yeah.
not like she's singing the
No,
whole
but I
song.
love when she sang with Phil Harris. Those are some of my
Oh,
favorite.
Those are those are good back and
the
forths.
30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love those.
I wish we had a time machine to go back and just talk to Mary and be like, listen, like you don't understand how beloved you are. Years from
Mhm.
now, it would behoove you to just keep going. Like I think that one of the beautiful parts of having these different examples of her involvement, it's a good evidence that like Jack wasn't just doing this on his own with guest shots. Like there were times
Yeah.
where he was paired
Yeah.
with other people, and you can tell how fun it becomes when you're listening to him bouncing off of Bing, and then Mary comes in and throws a wrench into the works. Like so suddenly the bit becomes different. Like you can't say the same thing necessarily about the Fred Allen one, where that becomes like everybody's already kind of currently involved more or less in a
Mhm.
timing scheme. This one is very much Jack has the ground, and then Mary comes in and steals
Yeah,
it.
that's because Bill Morrow was Bing's writer at this point.
Yep.
And he very much knew the routine that she was at her best when her voice could just sort of plunge into when other people are talking or being boastful, that she could come in and puncture pretensions. So,
Right.
Yeah.
but I'd
So-
also mention the fact that she messes up the last line is also an indication of probably what drove her, made her not want to be on radio anymore. That she messes up the line of, saying thank you, Bing, or whatever. And then Jack can jump in as a ad lib and say, read that line again, Mary.
I know. I love it. His ad libs in this episode were hilarious. I loved it. And, going back to Fred Allen, they always say that Fred Allen is the great ad libber. And I think it's true that Fred Allen could ad lib an insult, and Jack Benny was not very good at that. But Jack Benny was very good at ad libbing, and this is one of the prime examples of his saying, "Oh, some line." Like I love those things,
Yes.
and joking about how
Yeah.
Bill Morrow, who was his writer before, is now the writer for Bing Crosby, and he's giving him nothing. Like to take that nothing and turn it into something, and this fun, spontaneous thing was the best part of the whole show.
His ad libbing always usually sounds like self-critique in places too. Like that's something that he's very good at. You'll notice like he manages to pull that off in space. And I agree. Like this is one of those very solid moments where Jack gets to shine as a comedian, which is something he always gets accused of not being.
It also wouldn't surprise me if Bill Morrow wrote some of that, gave him nothing and then gave him a line to say a complaint about how he had nothing to say and how Morrow
This is pretty in line with the kinds of things that Jack Benny does ad lib. In some ways, he sort of ad libs as a producer, where it's like things are not going the way that I was hoping.
Yes.
And that, as well as the ad libs critiquing Mary when anybody misreads a line, I see his ad libs as all about control of the show, and that he's really intent. And so it's the one time he can be sort of sharp about it, because they are critiques, just as you say. So, but very funny, but very don't mess with me.
And this is why I like Jack's appearances so much on Bing Crosby's show, because he's being written by one of his best writers. That you never get a chance to hear this writer write for him unless he's appearing on the show. Because when did Morrow stop writing for him? What, 42, 43, something there? Yeah. And so here we have 5 years after that he's getting written by Morrow's writing his lines. So I think that's awesome. And into the 50s too, whenever he appears on this show, he's always getting written by him. And I would assume they're giving him the reins to write.
It gives you a great tease of what might have happened if Morrow maybe came back to staff and had to adapt to what the 4 Lucky Strike writers ended up contributing, because it doesn't strictly revert back to the Morrow and Boulogne subversive, very like irreverent humor. It's much more in tandem with what Balzer, Tackerberry, Josephsberg, and Perrin had established as Jack going forward.
Right.
But without losing the energy, you know.
Yeah.
I wonder how much did people in the general public know about what was going on behind the scenes and the writers and things for Jack to be able to reference that? Like, would people get it? Is that something that people knew from like reading the newspaper or something?
I mean, if they're reading local papers, Kathy, right? Would that be the case?
And the fan magazines.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
a lot.
It's for the ultra fans. I mean, there are a lot of people that are not going to get that, but and if anything, it's for Jack and Bing to enjoy that they're poking fun with that whole thing as well.
Right. It makes you feel involved in the gag. It makes you feel involved in you feel like you're in on it's like the Success of the Road movies. You feel like you are involved in an inside joke, and that makes you feel good inside.
Well, I think that's a good ending point for us, probably. I enjoyed all of these shows. It would be really hard for me to pick a favorite amongst these. I was just thinking, oh, maybe we'll all pick our favorite or say, but for me, I could make an argument for 3 out of the 4 of these for sure for being my top of them. And I mean, I kind of got to give it to the Fred Allen one, the first 10-minute thing we showed, just for the fact that it's the only time you ever see Jack and Mary being a couple and being just out there and we're married. And that's, you know, because you just never, ever got that. Unless it was Jack appearing on the Tonight Show years later and talking about it, because then, of course, he would be himself. Which is a whole different thing, but interesting stuff. So, but let's just go around and you can have multiple favorites. What were some of your favorites of these 4 shows we presented? Let's go to Kathy first. Kathy, what do you think?
Oh, I love thinking about the context of all 4 of them and what they said indicated about the development of Jack and Mary's character and fame. So there were moments of all 4 that I really loved. So, I won't choose.
A very political answer there. Nicely done. John?
I will not only choose my favorite, I'll rank them. Ballpate's at the bottom, then Brewster's Millions, then Fred Allen, and my favorite, the one I enjoyed the most, was the Bing Crosby. Even though I love Mary in the earlier era, I just, as you know, sitting and listening and enjoying, that's the one that I enjoyed the most.
See, John, every once in a while I wonder, why are you on here? And then you come through with something like that, loving an episode that I just love. If I was going to stick one up there, yeah. I mean, having Bing and Mary and Jack is just so much fun. I'm glad that you picked that as your favorite. That's very cool. Zach?
I personally love the Fred Allen thing for 2 reasons. Number one, I love hearing that little bit about Fred Allen talking about Thanks a Million. Like, just sometimes small things like that will send me down a rabbit hole to try to find the material, if it still exists, and actually witness it. But also, it's so like Daryl and I talked about the feud and had Stuart Kanan on my show. That feud fascinates me, not just because of what it is for comedy history, but what it helps contribute to in regards to Jack's later career as a concert violinist, because it is sort of the beginning of a journey in many ways, especially if you've had the fortune of listening to some of the concerts that still exist. The B is a part of that program. So hearing a period before this feud even happened, which came solely off an ad lib, I think is eternally fascinating, and listening to how the dynamic will change literally within the span of a year.
Yeah. Well, I'm just so happy we presented all of these, because it's so funny. I didn't think when I was putting these together, thinking about these, how much to each one of us, different pieces of them would mean so much. Zach with his film history stuff, it totally makes sense. With with Kathy and her history and her knowledge of early Benny and seeing how they morph this relationship and Mary over time makes it interesting. And then of course John somehow makes things interesting, and I don't understand how he does that, because he's, you know, you'd think you have to be interesting yourself to pull that off, but apparently you don't. So
he's just appeasing him because his dad used to play for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So
yeah, that's gotta be it. You know,
this is a totally off the topic thing, but I just had to mention it, that my grandfather's name is Murdo Mackenzie. No relation. Really? I'm also not related to Skitch Henderson, but I get so close.
Well, it's like John Smith. There's tons of those out there. Murdo Mackenzie's got to be the most common. What are the odds of that?
Well, okay, and because everything is connected somehow to everything else, I'm wearing one of my Beatles shirts today. It's my Yellow Submarine, and every time I hear Peggy Lee's name, I can never get over the fact that I think it was John Lennon once called her Peggy Leg, and knowing that in her later days she did have an amputation. That's so everything connects to everything.
Okay. It does. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. If we're still on over there in SPERDVAC, I don't know if they've edited this part out or what we're going to do, but anyway,
I just muted you the entire time.
Exactly. I just want to thank all the SPERDVACians and for joining us. So thank you so much. I don't know if that's their name. I don't know if they.
We are the supporters and lovers of classic radio, and
you are.
Yeah.
So and we are as a team as well. I mean, it is so much fun to present old time radio and talk about it, and early television and talk about it, and have people that are interested in it, and we can all share, and that's why people come to SPERDVAC, right? So I think it's fantastic. So thanks everybody. Enjoy this SPERDVAC convention, and join us other times for other. We sort of have our own little SPERDVAC Jack Benny thing going throughout the year, and so you can always join us anytime, and it's fun. All right. Wonderful. Thanks everybody.